things, okay? But we're going to start with the more general nervous system disorder, rabies, okay? And I should show the office clip, the 5K run for rabies, but I don't have it ready. Okay.
I can pull it up as fast as I can find it.
You could, right? All right, so the interesting, one of the characteristics of rabies, it's a Rhabdo virus, which means it's a single-stranded RNA virus. It is able to transmit or travel or infect through neurons, so through the synapse, right? So this is our synaptic cleft, right? It is able to make proteins that can then travel through the presynaptic neuron into the postsynaptic neuron. And so most of the infection in rabies is in neural tissue, in neurons. And if it can spread, you know, from one neuron to the next, then it can infect your whole nervous system. Okay? The 5 stages of rabies. So the first, I guess, which isn't on here, but would be transmission. And it's transmitted through saliva of an infected mammal. Through a bite, and that's the most common way. You could somehow be transmitted not through a bite if you somehow got saliva maybe into your mouth. But generally it's through the saliva of a bite. It punctures the skin, goes into the muscle. Yes?
Let's say I have rabies and then I bit someone,
Exactly, yeah.
we also human.
Right. But generally it's known that the person has rabies much sooner before that symptom occurs. And they're generally in medical care and, you know, isolated to where they can't bite anyone. Transmission then, it starts, it's transmitted through the saliva into the muscle and nervous tissue. At the site of transmission. I'm going to move this. And it can proliferate at that site for, it can be for 5 days, but up to 2 years. Okay, and at this point, there's generally no symptoms or no abnormal symptoms other than, you know, you got bit by something, so you're going to have those symptoms. Yes?
So if it remains, it's like asymptomatic, it can stay asymptomatic in your body for 2 years before it can actually kill you?
Yeah, no, before it even goes to the next stage. But if it goes to the next stage, then you're dead. Yeah. No, it is not a guarantee if you are bitten by something with rabies. But, yeah.
So, could you say if someone gets bitten by a dog and you don't know if it has rabies or not, do you just get that like rabies shot as a preventative measure?
Yes, so the rabies shot is an injection of antibodies which will help target the virus. With your immune system. So if you can get that shot immediately while it's incubating or at the transmission site, then you have a much better chance of it not progressing and your immune system able to defeat it.
Because once it progresses, you're just kind of done for.
Right. Once it progresses, you're pretty much done for. So there are a couple things. You know, you have pre-exposure not vaccinations, but pre-exposure antibodies that you can introduce to your immune system. So some people that are working with animals, like vets, or if you work in caves, or if you're a wildlife biologist, generally it's recommended that you get these pre-exposure shots, which will, it's not as good as a vaccine as most other vaccines that we have made, but it just gives you a better chance if and when rabies might be transmitted.
Have you been back something with rabies before?
Not that I know of, but I do have the pre-exposure shots because I was, as a graduate student, working with bats, which carry rabies.
Meredith.
What's that?
Is that Meredith that gets bit by a bat? Yeah. I'm actually
Did she get bit?
Yeah.
She got bit by a rat.
That's why
We're talking about the office.
Oh, Meredith. I thought about Meredith, a student here.
No, Meredith in the office gets bit by the bat, and that's why they have the
Right, yeah. So, okay. So incubation, if you can treat it while it's in this stage, it's likely that you can, your body's immune system can be activated where it reduces the chances of going on to the next stage, which is prodrome. Okay, in prodrome, you start to exhibit initial symptoms. Which are uncharacteristic of rabies and variable. Like, you can't just list out the symptoms and say, oh, that's rabies. Generally, rabies is identified by, okay, did you get bit by an animal? We're going to go find the animal and see if it has rabies. Okay? And these symptoms could vary from, just like your cold. You might have a cough or some sort of stuffy nose or fever or body aches. Feel like the flu-like symptoms, essentially. Or headaches, things like that. But at that stage, it has gone beyond incubation and has now infected your nervous system, probably into your spinal cord and brain, but it's not major. This next stage, the neurological stage, these are where you exhibit advanced symptoms. And these are also variable, but much more severe. So this is where you would get hydrophobia, major neurological things like aggression or major headaches. And essentially what's happening is the infection is so advanced, it's infiltrated your brain and is now causing swelling because of your immune reaction to that, and the infection itself is destroying nervous tissue.
I've heard that with humans the symptom doesn't occur, but would animals, when they start foaming at the mouth, be in the neurological stage?
Yes, yeah, they would be in that neurological stage, right? So this is where you would exhibit biting behavior, the paralysis of the swallowing muscles, which causes salivation, and the person has a fear of water. It's another one, yeah.
Is that what causes the foaming in the mouth in animals, the neuralization of these?
Yep. Yes, and then the virus is also in the saliva at that point. And so this what allows the propagation of the disease. They can't swallow, foaming of the mouth, meaning it has excess saliva, can't swallow it, and it also has these aggressive symptoms, and so it bites something and passes it on.
If a human gets rabies, do they lose their mind so much that they bite people too?
Yes, generally. I mean, there's a couple different categories. One of them is commonly associated with that aggressive behavior, biting, and they've kind of lost all like personality at this point.
Do humans foam at the mouth too?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because they're basically your throat is paralyzed, so you can't swallow. That reflex is gone, so.
Prodrome stage. If you catch it at that stage, is it also too late, or since it's still initial, can they do anything at that stage?
It's also too late.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you.
The incubation stage,
Yeah, even though it just feels like a cold, it's still advanced to the point where it can't be treated. Actually, It has like a 3% survival rate. And those that have survived are not in any good condition. Yeah. Was there a question, Annie?
Yeah, so are there any physical evidences of rabies at like bite site?
No, and that's kind of one of the mysteries of it. It's hard to identify, or at least we haven't developed a test where we can find it, the antibodies for it, or the virus itself,
So then,
until it's too late.
so is there anything that like doctors can do? So you get bit by a dog, you go to the doctor, you get that exposure, like
That shot.
that shot. Can they take some of the blood and see if you have been infected, or is it just like kind of like
They-
an estimation of like, because I know they can test the dog for rabies.
Right, because it's in this advanced stage.
Okay.
So the incubation and prodrome, the incubation at that stage, it's too hard to detect, and we
So you
haven't developed a test.
But is it like, so if you get bit by a dog who does have rabies, are you almost guaranteed that you were going to get rabies, or is it kind of just like a...
Well, we don't really know, because if we know that, we're going to treat you.
Yeah.
And it's more than likely that you'll be able to beat it. But yeah.
How soon do you need to go to the doctor once you get bit? Like immediately?
Immediately, yeah.
If you go next day?
I mean, the quicker the better. But probably the next day you'll probably still be fine. Because it takes 5 days to 2 years for it to incubate. Yeah.
So if you get bit and you don't know if this animal has rabies, you get the shot and won't have any side effects?
Yes. More than likely, yes. Okay. The last two stages are pretty self-explanatory. As it advances and your brain swells, you go into a coma, and then you die. And very rarely can you kind of go into a coma and then not die. All right, so a fifth step would be recovery, but it's not a full recovery, ever. No, you regain consciousness, but you have so much neurological damage that you may never walk again, you may never have full neurological function again. All right, and so this information, I put the link of where I got all this, which is from this Medical Microbiology 4th edition. There's a lot more information on rabies, on the virus itself, on the variability of the symptoms if you want.
Do you know much about how the actual treatment works for rabies?
Other than it's a shot. It used to be in the stomach, but I think the more recent shots, you don't have to get in the stomach anymore. And I'm not sure why it was in the stomach. Okay, this is all very interesting because where it was already too late. But they didn't know he had rabies until he died. Okay, so even though he had been handling bats, if the doctors don't know that you have exposure to some animal, then they can't treat you for it. And by that time, it would have been too late anyway. But the big mistake was handling bats with your bare hands and letting them lick you. Yeah, Eric, sorry. And then,
They didn't mention him being like aggressive or rabid.
yeah, so they
Happen?
it doesn't always happen, but who knows what kind of drugs he was under to suppress some of that as well. Yeah, Clarissa.
So if humans and other animals get rabies from getting bit by something with rabies, how does that animal initially get rabies?
You got bit by some.
Where does the Rhabdo virus come from?
The chicken or the egg? Yeah, I don't know, it's existed among mammals for a long time. Yeah.
Like you eat your own.
So the only,
That way it starts.
I don't know how it initially started.
the only way to get it goes to get in contact with somebody's saliva that has it.
Yeah. So it can exist among animal communities because they're in constant contact with each other. And it remains in the wild. And there's a number of mammals that can contract it. And actually the one that's probably the most likely and most dangerous are raccoons. Even though bats are kind of initially what people think of, raccoons are probably more dangerous, more likely to be rabid, and more likely to come in contact with you.
They're more dangerous because they're more likely to come in contact.
Yeah.
Does their saliva have to come in contact with your blood? Because if you got bit by something like that, make you bleed, you just
Yeah. Right, so puncturing the skin is going to increase the likelihood of transmission. Yeah. So they said that these bats did not bite them and did not puncture their skin, which I don't believe, because every bat that I've ever handled tries to bite you all over the place. So, but yeah, if you have a bat in your house and you need to get rid of it, the easiest way to do it is to open the door and let it fly out. But don't touch it. Yeah, at least wear gloves. Or you can call me. Yeah.
Doctor, you ever seen the movie Black Sheep?
Yes. I have seen that. Yeah, with the chocolate pudding and the, yeah. Just last week, maybe, no. Somebody in Utah died of rabies. And it's the first instance of somebody dying from rabies in 70 years. For the picture, I don't know.
It's not a smile picture.
All right, I'm gonna play the video here if I can. Okay, shh. You gotta watch the advertisement.
He was seen by a chiropractor that relieved some of the pain initially, but then numbness and tingling into his arms.
Crystal Sedgwick says her father, 55-year-old Gary Giles, started experiencing these initial symptoms back in mid-October, and from there, it only got worse.
Being touched, he felt like he had pins and needles all over his skin. He was really uncomfortable. He felt like his skin was on fire.
She said it wasn't until he died on November 4th that they realized he had been infected with rabies.
Usually within a couple of weeks, the person will have swelling of the brain, swelling of the spine, will be placed in a coma and will pass away.
The state health department says they believe Giles contracted rabies from a likely source, a bat.
He would just catch them and put them outside. I know that my mom has always thought that bats are really cute, and so he would sit there and hold them for her and let her like pet their little heads, and they would lick them, but they never really thought anything of it.
Health experts say only 1% of bats in the wild.
The bats would lick the humans, not the humans lick the bats.
With rabies, but they say those that are infected are the ones that would attack you. Crystal says since this morning, there are no longer bats in the attic of her parents' home. She hopes that by sharing her father's story, others will be more careful and avoid contact with bats.
He's very honest, very kind. I definitely don't think this is how he would have wanted to die. It was very painful for him. And it was hard to watch.
In Salt Lake City, Amanda Gary, Fox 13 News.
Okay. So they explained a lot. I mean, you could see in their explanation when he first exhibited back pain, symptoms. It's already in that prodrome stage where.
Fox 13 News, Utah.
Okay. So that's rabies. Very unlikely that anyone here will ever have to experience it, but interesting to see. Okay, we're gonna detail then the anatomy and physiology of the spinal cord. All right, so the figure on the video lecture shows a separation. Okay, just this dotted line here. And what you essentially have here then, and it's not actually shaped like this, but these are nerves of the peripheral nervous system coming in and out of the spinal cord. And then in the middle here we have the actual spinal cord of our central nervous system. And the way this is oriented, we have our dorsal / posterior end oriented on the top, and our ventral / anterior end at the bottom. So if you drew a line down the middle, guess I'll do that. We have our anterior and posterior, or dorsal and ventral sides. And if you think about, if you were going to handle a large number of signals going in opposite directions, you would probably want to minimize them running into each other. And so that's how your nervous system is arranged. So everything coming from the dorsal end into our spinal cord is afferent. Okay, what does afferent mean? Where is it going? Yeah, it's going to the brain, to the central nervous system. And that's going to be then our sensory information.
Can you zoom on it?
AFFERENT. Whereas everything coming into the ventral or anterior portion is efferent, and thus your motor pathways. So what's going to cause something to move or secrete or have some sort of action. All right, and this is true for both the white matter and the gray matter. Okay, so let me zoom in. There we go. So we have this part in the middle, which is our gray matter.
Central canal.
There's a central canal in there, yep. And then surrounding the gray matter, we have white matter. The white matter, you can't see it just by looking at it, but has regions of areas which are going up and down, so towards the head, cranial and caudal, which are called tracts. Okay, and these are the myelinated portions. So this is really just the transmission of signals from one area to another. The gray matter is the processing part. So this is where it's determined what type of signal it is and then in which tract it should go in. And in the white and gray matter, they have the same same naming, right? We're going to have dorsal horns, same nomenclature. Lateral horns, and ventral or posterior horns, right? So you can use those interchangeably. And then you have dorsal white matter, lateral white matter, ventral white matter, or posterior, lateral, anterior. Yes?
So with like the dorsal ones being afferent and ventral being efferent, what is like this lateral matter, lateral horns and like the lateral white gray matter, so do both, or is it?
Yep. So if it's on the anterior side, then it's generally efferent.
So it's still just like
right across the middle.
Lateral stuff just like divided half and
Yep. And in reality, the line is not so clearly in the middle, but yeah, that's the concept. Right. So different sections of the spinal cord have slightly different anatomy, but we're just going to treat it all the same. So, let's see. So we also have this slight division, okay, in the white matter. Well, it's actually not too slight. It's a pretty deep separation. So we have the posterior or dorsal, median sulcus, and the anterior median fissure. I don't know why. One's a fissure and one's a sulcus. And Blake asked me about that, and I didn't look it up. One's a fissure, one's a sulcus.
I'm not sure, but I thought fissures were just deeper sulci.
Maybe. I mean, that's what I said in response, but I don't know for sure. Okay, so that's it for the anatomy. So we're going to go into a little more detail in the next slide as to what these areas are associated with. All right, so here's a close-up of our horns. Okay, and if we split it down the middle, and we know that we've got dorsal horns, lateral horns, and ventral horns. Well, our horns are somatic, okay? So if it's on the dorsal side or the posterior side, and it's somatic, we know it's afferent, it's going up into the brain, and it's sensory. So this is somatosensory. Okay, so any sort of somatic part of the nervous system which is sensory is going to be going through the dorsal horns. Well, the lateral horns then are visceral. Okay, so if it's still on the dorsal side, then this is viscerosensory. And then we know the signals are efferent on the ventral side. So those are motor pathways.
Is it called viscerosensory because it's directly connecting with the organs of the body?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So all the visceral senses from different parts of the organs. Although a lot of that also goes exterior to the spinal cord through the vagus nerve, which we'll talk about another day. So the ventral horns have somatomotor nerves. And then, so what is this last part? Good. All right, and it's the same for the tracts that surround those same areas. So the dorsal, the more dorsal tracts are going to be somatosensory. Those that are closer to the midline are going to be viscerosensory. And then same thing for visceromotor and somatomotor. Okay? Now, like we said in the Kahoot, when something goes into, so I have a signal here, and it's a let's say it's somatosensory, so it's coming from this dorsal root. Okay, it's synapses in the dorsal horns. At some point, it's going to switch sides and go to the other side of the brain. So it may do that at actually the gray matter. And then so from there it would go up the spinal, or sorry, from there it would go into one of these tracks and then up the spinal cord.
Sorry, can you do that? Explain more, I'm sorry.
So you have this signal which is coming from the nerves into the spinal cord. At some point it's going to switch sides. It's going to go from left to right or right to left. Okay, so if the signal came in from, this would be the left, at this one it actually synapsed into one of these tracks on the other side and then went up to the brain and is going to the right side of the brain. That make sense? So this up arrow actually isn't, it's actually coming at you. But I can't draw that. Maybe I'll do a dotted line.
Why does it switch sides?
I'm not entirely sure, but it does. No, a lot of the brain pathways in animals do that, but yeah.
So the left side, so like the left side of your eyes, of both eyes, see your right side, and like that part of your eye sees your right side, and it goes back to the left side of your brain.
Right.
And so in order to be able to control the side it sees, it has to switch sides. And so your eyes are what really determine why it goes that way. So this part of your